Welcome to the News9 Mediaverse, and you are watching On Point with me, Kartikeya Sharma. Israel is all set to invade North Gaza. Lakhs of people have already left for south to escape the Israeli invasion. They are at the Rafah border. But the bigger question is Hamas a terrorist organization being underestimated? An organization which is trying to mimic ISIS. How strong is the Hamas today? Another word for Hamas, if I literally translate, is Islamic Resistance Force. Should it be a stage-by-stage operation as suggested by Ehud Barak, former Defense Prime Minister of Israel? Or simple, one-stage assault, which a lot of people think that Israel can actually do it? I will answer all these questions, but first, let me take you through the details. And let me tell you what Hamas 2.0 version looks like. Because what people know of Hamas of 1990, 2001, 2009 and 2014 may be a bit of a surprise. So let me just go across and tell you the things that have taken the world by surprise. Though Hamas took everyone by surprise. So in 2008, Hamas had rockets which had a range of 40 kilometers, only 40. And by 2021, Hamas acquired rockets with a range of 230 kilometers. 230 kilometers. Hamas military wing has 40,000 soldiers. In 1990, they had only 10,000 soldiers. That's the difference. In 2021, they managed to save 40% of the missile inventory after the 2021 war, where Israel rocked every city of Gaza. They still saved 11,000 rockets. Hamas had 23,000 rockets, 23,000, and they ended up saving more than 11,000 rockets. Hamas saved, as I said, 11,750 of these rockets. That's the exact number. So imagine the sort of ability which the Hamas has built of the tunnels to save their stuff. Inventory includes anti-tank, anti-aircraft missile. Imagine these weapons if they're used in a close quarter. Aditya, if they are used in a close quarter on infantry. Imagine the sort of lethal weapon which the Israeli army would face. Isn't it?
Absolutely. It would lead to further destruction and unimaginable destruction, really.
Unimaginable destruction. Hamas also has a cyber and a naval wing which was not there in 1990. And another part of this is that Hamas has become more of a lethal force. You know why? Because earlier their funding, which was up to $70 million, is now at $350 million. From $70 million to $350 million. So that is why Hamas is mimicking ISIS. Israel lost 9 soldiers in 2009 operation. It's called Operation Cast Fleet. Important operation which the Israelis held. They lost 66 soldiers in 2014. Why? Because Hamas grew more lethal. 66 soldiers. Imagine what will happen now. So, when we are talking about Hamas, or when we are talking about decoding Hamas, we need to understand that the Hamas has built tunnels in Gaza which stand at 500 kilometers. 500 kilometers is the web of tunnels that they have been able to build. That's the depth at which the Hamas has worked. Before anything, before I go to a different set, because Benjamin Netanyahu is facing internal criticism, I'll be joined by my guest. Let me play out the bite of the IDF spokesperson on the war first.
עד כה התקנו 291 משפחות.
In Gaza, we are evacuating the population from Gaza City. We are moving the population south to Nahal Oz. The evacuation continues. By now, hundreds of thousands have already been evacuated. Residents of Gaza City, I call on you again. Hamas is trying to prevent your evacuation. We will allow it to the south. Get out of Gaza City and all the surrounding area for your personal safety. Move south to Nahal Oz. In this area, there are conditions that will allow you to survive. We have so far informed 286 families of IDF fallen soldiers, bereaved families. We also only informed 126 families of missing persons and abductees. So far, we have notified 291 families of soldiers killed. We embrace the bereaved families. We have notified the families of 199 hostages. There's an effort and top national priority on the issue of hostages, and we are focused on that effort as a top national priority. We continue gathering more information on the hostages and operational internal channels and are in continuous contact with the families. The IDF is working around the clock to return the hostages, and the IDF and the State of Israel are doing this.
Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation to defend itself against these attacks from Hamas and to try to do what it can to make sure that this never happens again. As I said in Tel Aviv, as President Biden has said, the way that Israel does this matters. Needs to do it in a way that affirms the shared values that we have for human life and human dignity, taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. No one should do anything that widens this conflict in any way or that furthers aggression against Israel from any other direction. I had very good conversations both with the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia and here in Egypt with President al-Sisi, and also heard, I think, a lot of good ideas about some of the things we need to do moving forward, including practical ideas on getting assistance to Palestinians in Gaza who are in need, but also good and important conversations about the future and where we hope ultimately together we can bring this in a much more positive way.
So on this issue, Hamas 2.0 version, why Hamas has gained strength, 1. Who financed Hamas, 2. How were they able to build naval, cyber espionage, tunnels, infrastructural muscle, 3. And how did Hamas actually ended up building local manufacturing facility within Gaza is something which we should ponder upon. Because we are not talking about Hamas that started in 1987. This is a Hamas which has challenged the state of Israel first. On this issue, I'm joined by my executive editor, Aditya Kaul. I'm also joined by Dr. Alexander Grinberg and Dan Pfefferman. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. And you know, these are the visuals. And I'm playing these visuals to you. And it should remind everyone how security lapses takes place. These are the visuals that the price of peace in the world is eternal vigilance. That the price of peace in the world is eternal vigilance. When Israel lost eternal vigilance, this happened. And you can see Hamas terrorists openly making their way through the wall with so much ease. And I should use the word ease. This is the ease of crossing. You must be thinking that this is some European nation or this is like south of Mexico. No. Boss, this is South Israel. And this is how they traveled. And they are making their own video. They are making their own video. And a country which takes immense pride in electronic surveillance also learnt a lesson that there is nothing better trustable than human intelligence, or it has to be part and parcel of an electronic surveillance. And these are the visuals which tell us the real story. And it just tells you the ease at which they started melding into civil areas where they kill children, women, unarmed men. And what happened in those 24 hours is the true face of terror. And no one needs to justify why terror happened. That's a secondary debate, which is called the Palestinian resolution. But the first thing which needs to be answered is, this is how terrorists came inside Israel. This is how they killed innocent people. And this is how, in name of ideology, they massacred 1,300 people. They were killed in shelters, cradle, bed, walking, running, fighting. And they had nothing probably to do with the state of Israel. we have to distinguish when the argument is that if Israeli forces need to distinguish between who are radicalized citizens and those who are terrorists, in this case, no such distinction was made. There was no military distinction. And in this context, imagine the restraint that was demonstrated by Prime Minister Modi. When our surgical strike took place, we went against the terrorists. When the Balakot took place, it was not a Pakistani military site. It was a terrorist site. I think everyone needs to remember what we did, what Hamas did. But coming back to the larger issue, Hamas 2.0. Aditya, how is it possible for a terrorist organization inspired by Muslim Brotherhood, born in 1987, to acquire so much of paramilitary strength in 30 years, which is cyber intelligence, which is naval strength, tunnels, electronic surveillance, rocket technology with a range of 230 kilometers. It is like this, Aditya. If you are sitting in Delhi, you can fire missiles towards Agra. You can actually strike Taj Mahal from old Delhi. It's like this.
That's right.
If you are in Delhi, you can actually bombard Dehradun. Or if you are in Delhi, you can actually bombard Ambala. How did they build strength like that?
Kartikeya, this hasn't happened overnight. This has happened over the years. We've seen the continuous growth over the decades. And what we witness today is an unimaginable historic intelligence failure of Israel, which obviously they will look into. They will certainly bounce back. I have no doubts about that. But one needs to understand that Hamas is not alone. They may be non-state actors, so-called non-state actors, but they have states behind them. In this particular case, the Iranian regime has been completely backing Hamas, not just with funding, but ammunition. There is so-called brotherhood that is being witnessed between Hamas and Hezbollah. We are seeing a situation where, as of now, it may not be a two-front war, but slowly it seems to be inching towards that. While the Israelis are going deep inside Gaza, in a few days from now, the ground assault may happen. We are also witnessing continuous rockets being fired from the northern side, where the Hezbollah says that they have given permission to their fighters to fight back against the so-called Zionists.
Just let me add to your argument. Hezbollah has stored, directed and pointing 150,000 rockets towards Israel.
Yes.
150,000. So, Hezbollah is not a threat. It's an imminent threat supported by Israel. Let me tell you, I was in Damascus. And in Damascus, I was there 2.5, 3 years ago. And there, every 100 meter, your car is stopped, or 200 meter in the city, Aditya. And then the telephone has to be made to the previous Naka or the checkpoint to personally figure out whether this car passed or not. So I was there and suddenly 50 BMWs passed. 50. And I said, who's this guy? I thought this is probably Assad, 50 huge black BMWs. And someone said, this is Hezbollah. So I said, Hezbollah? I thought that's Lebanon. He said, no, that's the excess he has. So I actually get what you are trying to say.
Probably,
I can feel it on my skin.
It could probably be Hassan Nasrallah. But what I can tell you, Kartikeya, is that Hezbollah is a state within a state. Hezbollah, as you rightly pointed out, has 150,000 or more. This is in public domain. If it is 150,000 in public domain, the knowledge, it would be much more in reality.
Absolutely.
And the damage would be also much more. And the kind of support it has in Lebanon, the public may be against it, the opposition may be against it, but it has wide support in the Lebanese army. There is Shia overall brotherhood that is being witnessed, and it is being estimated by researchers and foreign policy and security watchers that if it is a two-front war, if Hezbollah goes all out there, they would receive at least 40 to 50% support from the Lebanese army as well.
Wonderful. I am also joined by Dan Pfefferman and also by Dr. Alexander Grinberg. Dr. Alexander Grinberg, your first thoughts, why Hezbollah has been able to acquire so much of strength? And are we dealing with a different Hezbollah? Is the world going to deal with a different Hezbollah? Different Hamas?
Well, it is rather simple because Hezbollah is not an organization. It's
Sorry, my
already
question was on Hamas.
little
My question was on Hamas. Are we dealing with a different Hamas?
Well, Hamas today is what Hezbollah was in 2014. So Hamas controls Gaza and has ministries, and it is an army. It's a professional army, and of course it gets training and funding from Iran. But still, Hamas is not Iran's proxy, it's rather Iran's client, which means that Hamas can receive money from Iran, provided it delivers. What does it deliver? It delivers terrorist attacks. So the more attacks it carries out, the more Iranian funding it gets.
And let me go to Dan Pfefferman. Dan, when we talk about a new Hezbollah, is it going to be a big challenge for the Israeli army? Because in 2009 operation and subsequently 2014, if you look at the casualties, they increased from 9 to 66. Dan.
Yeah. First of all, I think Dr. Greenberg's point was spot on in that the Hamas of today is very similar to the Hezbollah of a few years ago, and so we can expect Hezbollah's capabilities and sophistication. I can hear the Iron Dome intercepting rockets right over my head, actually.
Stay safe, Dan. Is it okay with you? Is it okay with you to be part of our...
I might have a siren in the middle and I'll have to take shelter.
Okay. If you need to do that, tell me. You can go ahead and take shelter.
Yeah, there's shelling all around central Israel where I live. Hamas has shown itself to be much more sophisticated than we expected. They clearly have learned their lessons. They're training with the Iranians. They're training and learning from Hezbollah. They're learning, all the different armed groups are learning from each other, and it seems that they have been either actively or passively learning from Islamic Jihad's operations against Israel over the last 2 years. So there's all these groups work together, train together, and learn. They produce operational lessons from what they're seeing. So we can expect Hezbollah, which accrued quite a bit of operational experience in Syria as well, where it was massacring Sunnis and Syrian civilians and fighting the different rebel groups in the Syrian civil war, also to be much more potent, certainly than it was the last time Israel faced them. And they have continued to amass rockets. 150,000 might be the conservative estimate.
Mm-hmm. But this brings me to another question. How have they been able to save so much of ammunition? What allows them to get away by manufacturing stuff locally and store them in the tunnels? This is something which could have been noticed by the Israeli imagery department, satellites. How have they built up this local manufacturing capacity? It's not as if the weapons are being built in Yemen and they are being transported to Gaza. Most of the security institutes are saying that they are actually manufacturing them in underground basements.
Yeah, that's the estimation right now, is that quite some time ago they switched from smuggling Iranian-made arms into simply producing their own, and then they only have to smuggle in the raw materials or dual-use materials in order to do that. They have the engineering sophistication, they've acquired the manufacturing capabilities, and there's one thing, I can only assume Israeli intelligence knows exactly where all of these facilities are. A lot of what's being targeted over these last week by airstrikes has been manufacturing and storage facilities. However, Israel is caught in a very terrible strategic predicament, and that is Hamas purposefully hides all of these facilities within densely populated areas so as to deter Israeli strikes. And Israel does put a lot of consideration into civilian casualties.
But Dan, how much, Dan, tell me, how much is it a consideration for IDF that the Hamas is in possession of anti-tank, anti-aircraft rockets? I mean to say, to have anti-tank rockets with you is something which any infantry battalion must be very, very concerned about, because it can smash through the armored personnel carrier.
Not only that, they have used them to threaten and to actually fire at civilian cars, trains, school buses in the south over the last few years. And so beyond targeting armored vehicles, they can actually target civilian transport infrastructure. It's a serious threat. It's a serious threat, and the reason that the proper treatment of this threat keeps getting delayed is because of the fear of what it will do to civilian casualties in Gaza. And Israel needs to take into account: do we want to risk a major regional escalation? And so it's not a good scenario for Israeli decision makers to be put in time and again. Now we're in the scenario where we really don't have a choice, it seems, here in Israel because of the events of last week.
Okay. Aditya, no choice? Is that the correct way to sum it up? No choice?
Absolutely no choice. I mean, look at the scale of this attack. Ever since the Holocaust, we haven't seen such a barbaric terror attack taking place. The kinds of pulls and pressures that Israel certainly has, but Israel doesn't look at pulls and pressures. Israel really acts by its foreign policy, its domestic policy, and of course, it's a Jewish state, and it will defend itself. What we also need to realize is, Kartikeya, that Israel doesn't have any other option. You know, they repeatedly say that we have nowhere else to go. That's something that keeps them going. And you know, they have seen the worst of it all during the Holocaust. So I think they don't have an option. They will go all out, and it will be a staged operation. We have seen airstrikes over the last 10 days. We could have already seen a ground assault, but I believe that there's been international pressure, particularly from the United States, that has led to some kind of a delay in the ground assault. We could see that in the next 3 to 4 days.
Why is the United States? I think I would have asked this question to you later. Why is Blinken trying to delay the Israeli operation? Is there a reason?
There are two reasons here. One is that US also believes in the Palestinian cause, even if it is completely against terrorism and Hamas terror, and stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel.
Despite saying ironclad friendship?
That's true. And the second part, and the most important, is that it's a humanitarian issue. And even though US has been shown the mirror several times, be it about Afghanistan, be it about Iraq, or several other instances, the US of course talks about humanitarian laws, preaches the world, and we'll have to stand by it.
US pulverized an entire country for a for 9/11.
And chemical bombs, yeah, absolutely. So what Antony Blinken over the last 4 days or 5 days has been doing, and we've witnessed it, he's been going continuously. He has made 2 visits to Saudi. He has gone to UAE. He has visited quite a few countries in the Middle East because, one, he is negotiating the release of the hostages. Second, he is trying to delay this kind of a war. And third, he is trying to ensure that civilian casualties should be as less as possible, and there should be a safe passage that should be created to Egypt via Gaza. So as of now, there is international pressure. That doesn't mean that Israel will stop its ground assault. That will eventually happen, and perhaps the occupation will be complete as well. But as of now, they are trying to vacate the civilians and trying to delay this particular operation.
Okay, let me go back to Dr. Alexander Greenberg. Dr. Greenberg, do you think that this is being done under the American pressure, that the assault which is getting delayed? Because if you look at the statement which have come from the Prime Minister's office, it seemed imminent 4 days ago, but then nothing has happened since then.
I think, yes, it is possible, though there are also other factors that should not be discarded. First of all the preparations on the ground operation that will never be a cakewalk, must be accomplished. In either way, it will be hell and for our soldiers. And yes, I believe also there is when President Biden, with all due respect to his sincere support for Israel, when he says that the power regime of Hamas must be eradicated, but the occupation of Gaza would be a mistake. So I don't understand how you can eradicate Hamas without occupying Gaza. So it's a kind of Iranian pressure in silk gloves, if I may say so. And by the same token, America wants to refrain from engaging Iran and Hisbah. The problem is that Hisbah and Iran think otherwise.
But Americans have, Dr. Greenberg, Americans have dedicated 2 strike groups in the Mediterranean, Eisenhower and Gerald Ford, and they're big strike group carriers.
Exactly because of this. So they tell us, if you are attacked by Hezbollah, so we will help you. But also, the problem is it may not work on Hezbollah, and that's it. But, I don't know. I don't know. There are various options. I'm not a fly on the wall with anyone, but it is possible to say there is a kind American pressure because they think so. It's so they don't want to see a humanitarian crisis. As for us, I don't. No one in Israel, literally no one, gives a damn to the suffering of Palestinian children. The suffering of Palestinian children now are as interesting as the suffering of German children in Berlin 43. But still, I don't know considerations about Prime Minister either.
Okay. Before we move forward on this discussion, there's another aspect to it which is internal to Israel. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak has spoken. There's a unity government, there is a cabinet which is a war cabinet, but there's another aspect to this debate, and that is what Ehud Barak has spoken. Let me take you through certain important aspects of what Ehud Barak says. Ehud Barak says Israel is not facing an existential crisis. That's very, very important. So Ehud Barak has spoken, Gaza should be a multi-stage operation. He's saying that it's not a single, should never be a single stage operation. Gaza should be a multi-stage operation, and let me tell you, Ehud Barak is saying that Hamas should be denied ISIS-type capability, and he was also the commander of the IDF during Oslo Accord. He was Prime Minister in 2000. He had served as a Defense Minister in 2009 when Operation was launched inside Gaza. So when he says this, he means it. So when Ehud Barak says world should see Israeli action as legitimate, he is actually raising a lot of political questions. When we look at military, we think that the military actually acts in a vacuum, but military has a political and strategic objective. Ehud Barak was the Israel's PM in 1999-2001. So he presided over Israel at a very crucial period of time. He served as Defense Minister in 2009. He was also an IDF commander. So he brings to table a lot of things which maybe Benjamin Netanyahu does not. Maybe Ehud Barak might not be important today, but he has spoken out. You know, these are the things he has said. So my question to you is, when Ehud Barak says it's not an existential crisis, our action should look legitimate, it should be a multi-stage operation, what are your thoughts on it?
I think certainly it's not an existential crisis really. Israel has moved out from that particular time. It has shown to the world the courage, the capacity to withhold any kind of trauma, any kind of adversarial threats that come their way continuously. And imagine their situation. They're surrounded by the Muslim world, the Arab world continuously, and yet they survive in technology, in military hardware. Speak about it. They are the leaders out there. They have this kind of a partnership with United States about.
But Aditya, he's raising political questions.
Yeah.
Ehud Barak has raised political questions.
No, political questions are fair, but I'm just trying to separate the military from the political. Politically speaking, I think it's a massive failure, a historic failure from Benjamin Netanyahu. Questions are being asked to him, his justice minister, his national security minister, and they'll have to answer. As of now, they may be engaged towards the response, a united front towards Hamas. But overall, they will have to, respond and perhaps resign from the government for a fresh election to take place, because that is required. It is because of the political turmoil, it is because of the judicial so-called reforms that he wanted and wanted to take control of the judiciary that we are seeing this day, unfortunately.
Are you saying that he was internally distracted? That Benjamin Netanyahu, instead of protecting the citizens of Israel, was more focused on other issues which were not directly related to the security of the Israeli state?
Kartikeya, he's leading the government. And if the head of the government in a democracy is diverted towards something, he is not, continuously looking at the national security perspective. It's not just him who is distracted. It is the entire government which is distracted. It is the national security apparatus.
Aditya, you went to Israel completely. 6 months ago. Did you feel that when you had gone there for 6-7 days, on a tour which was organized by the government there? Did you feel that there was a political distraction?
As I said, again, two things, Kartikeya. One, I observed it here because how many times have elections taken place in the last 2 to 3 years? And secondly, what I observed and what I've been talking about is a certain sense of overconfidence. And that led to a lackadaisical approach.
Hubris.
That, you are too much prepared, you're too much ready, you've threatened the adversary, and you perhaps undermine their capabilities and say that no, they won't be able to enter us. We've destroyed these tunnels, we've destroyed their chain of command, we've destroyed their network. They will not be able to accumulate any kind of ammunition. And then we have the Iron Dome. If there are missile attacks, the Iron Dome will be there. But the scale, the proportion, the magnitude of this attack not just embarrasses the Israel government, but in future, they cannot keep their guard down. They'll have to be 100 times much more prepared, not just with the intelligence, but with the IDF on ground, both at the border with Gaza and with Lebanon, to distract the adversary and of course be prepared for any kind of eventuality.
Obviously, it tells you the PPTs don't win you war. PPTs might get you attention in United Nations. PPT might get you attention and front page headlines, but they don't win wars. Dan, to you, Ehud Barak's statement when he says that it should be a multi-stage operation and our actions should be seen legitimate by the world. Your thought on it?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to separate these two elements that Aditya brought up, and they're both accurate, but I think we need to put aside the political failure at this point. The political level will see the repercussions from the electorate after this is over. Right now, we have a unified leadership for the first time in a few years, and we need to make sure that they stay focused on the war and reconstruction effort. The intelligence failure stems from a place of hubris and stems from a place of a failed paradigm conception of Hamas's intentions and capabilities, and an over-reliance on the technological barrier, a lack of redundancy, as we've discussed previously on the show. Now, as far as the stage of the operation, Israel here has a massive challenge that countries, for example, like Russia, don't have to concern themselves with, and that is international opinion and humanitarian issues. The question here is, what is Israel's end goal? Is it completely toppling Hamas? Is it completely getting the military capabilities out of the Gaza Strip? Something that it should have done years ago, but
Dan, sorry, I'm interrupting you. Ehud Barak also made one very important statement, and I really thought over it. He says in his statement that Hamas should be denied that Daesh sort of capability, ISIS, which was it was functioning like an MNC. It was getting recruits from outside. It was exporting terror. It was using mobile phones. So, how does one make actions seem legitimate, morally right, and still go after these terrorists?
Right. Hamas over the last few years has turned into a de facto state in Gaza with a de facto government that was operating as a de facto government. It was collecting taxes on imports and into Gaza. It was collecting taxes from the 10,000 Gazan workers a day who were coming into Israel. It was collecting international aid, $30 million a month from Qatar. There was a lot of money coming in, not to mention the Iranian funds that were being channeled to its military capabilities. It was acting on the one hand and trying to portray itself as some kind of governing entity of a de facto state. And Israel, unfortunately, was treating it as a de facto state. Again, part of the failed conception, part of the failed paradigm to understand Hamas and its true intentions. And so now there needs to be a crackdown on Hamas, not just by Israel, but the entire regional players and the international community, to cut off all its lines of funding, to make sure it is properly labeled as a terrorist entity, to cut off all its supply lines, and to turn it into the international pariah that it needs to be treated as in order to deal with it now that it's shown its true face as a proper and hideous terror organization, and to limit its capabilities to influence those in the West Bank or those inside Israeli society. There needs to be a multi-dimensional assault on Hamas and its capabilities. I will agree with Ehud Barak on one thing, in that this is not an existential threat to Israel. It's a very serious threat. Many Israelis lost their lives in this. Entire sections of Israel will not have these communities, these thriving and beautiful and peaceful communities like they did just 2 weeks ago, at least for a long time. But this is certainly not an existential threat. We're now a country of close to 10 million people with the most advanced economy and military in the region. And one major terrorist attack, as hideous as this was, is not going to pose an existential threat to the state of Israel. What is very important now is also as things heat up on the northern border, and there's been more shelling and more exchange of fire with Hezbollah operatives, is that here the regional actors need to be responsible in restraining Iran and Hezbollah. The United States and other European actors that are coming together need to be deterring Iran and its proxies and Hezbollah to make sure that this does not expand into a multi-front war for Israel, which could really and not necessarily drag the region into a broader conflict.
Dr. Alexander, when Ehud Barak says that it's not an existential crisis and action should look legitimate, your thoughts?
Well, I think I must say I hold in very low esteem people like Ehud Barak, who have zero emotional intelligence, and they're never strategists. They're technicians. They're the best technicians of special operations, but manage the special operations doesn't mean to be a strategist. First of all, I don't understand what does it mean to deny Hamas ISIS capacities. Can we gauge what ISIS capacities are to stab people with knives? So is it to burn people alive? Is it ISIS capacity or not ISIS capacity? And all other suggestions, although not sound like boiling the ocean. It's boiling the ocean, yeah, let's deny a multi-stage operation, how it's possible. And there's no way to even to think about the resumption of life in Israel's north if there is, if any threat remains. It is not existential yet, but again, as I said, it is zero emotional intelligence. So in an independent Jewish state, it has been the most horrible massacre slaughter Jews of women, children, and torture with bestial hatred for the first time since the Holocaust. So it may not be existential in technical terms, but of course it is in terms of self-confidence or just normal psyche of people. And this Ehud Barak does not understand. It is Ehud Barak's courtesy that IDF and not the king, that we succumb to this magic of illusion of little and smart army that knows everything, intelligence, that this idea that technology can substitute human intelligence, and just understanding the enemy. To understand the enemy, you must read what he writes and says in Arabic.
So you are saying that these are two different things, but then what about when he says that the action should look legitimate to the wider world? Our operations.
I think it's pardon my French. I don't want to use the vernacular English. It's so stupid that now no one in Israel is not looking for legitimacy. Maybe our prime minister thinks otherwise. Don't know. But it is 1,300 citizens were slaughtered on Israel's territory. I think that under these circumstances, if any country looks for legitimacy, it's something insane. But Ehud Barak doesn't understand that the most elementary things are just human soul, not of special operations.
I think that's also a very powerful point what Dr. Alexander says, that when society is assaulted in a way, then there is a consensus, then those rules don't apply, Aditya.
Absolutely.
And that is why I think the government has said that it's not a military operation. I think that is why they're using the word it's war.
It is a war, and I'll compare this to what we witnessed during Kargil.
Correct.
And there was national unity that was witnessed. Many politicians didn't see eye to eye.
But we were restrained.
We were restrained. We were restrained in much way, but it was a war which we won. There were many casualties in that, and we mark it for the last 25 years. So I think there is national unity in display, even today, every evening when
Okay,
Benjamin...
let me ask you a political question.
Yeah.
Restraint was our restraint born out of the fact that it's a nuclear neighborhood, Pakistan, China, and there is no restraint because right now there is no threat of a nuclear neighborhood?
One
is that
of
the
course.
defining part?
Of
We
course.
had to be restrained because we know that there are 200 nuclear missiles there.
Of course, Kartikeya, that is the clinching part. That a nuclear power, we obviously will not go in a very haphazard way. We have to think twice before acting.
2611?
Absolute. 2611, there should have been a response. There should have been a response. Unfortunately, there wasn't. But I think there were other terror attacks much lower than 2611 where we have shown our capability. But at the same time, India and Israel cannot be compared. The land, the population, and even Gaza, for instance, is a small belt of area where the entire population is used as human shield, and there are different networks. Here we are talking about an entire Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, where in Punjab you may have Lashkar-e-Toiba, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa you might have Jaish-e-Mohammed, and in another area you will have Hizbul Mujahideen in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Correct.
So there are 100 areas or 200 areas where they are spread around in perhaps multiple provinces. So I think it cannot be compared, but yes, India has shown restraint time and again. But here I think for now there will be a unity, there will be a war which Israel will win, even though there will be a lot of propaganda against Israel. Its friends will ask questions, there will be questions asked at the United Nations. But I think in the next few days this war might be delayed, the ground assault might be delayed, but will eventually happen in the next few days.
Dan, Aditya is saying that the ground assault might be delayed, but it will happen. Whether it's, correct me Aditya, whether it's a single stage operation or multi-stage operation.
I think it will be a multi-stage operation. It cannot be a single stage operation. We are talking about a huge area, multiple areas. You don't know where they are hiding. Of course, today IDF statement says that we know some of the areas where hostages have been kept. So you have to keep hostages in mind as well.
Okay.
And today the statement says that there are 200 hostages, 199 hostages that have been confirmed today.
Is that complicating a ground assault, Dan?
It's going to be an incredibly complicated assault, and the 199 confirmed hostages is going to make it just that much more complicated. Around 150 or 60 in the hands of Hamas, and possibly another 30 or 40 in the hands of Islamic Jihad, according to press reports. The hostages make it incredibly complicated, and there are attempts, there are rumors, possibly through Qatari mediation, to secure the release, at least of the foreigners, or the women and children, or the elderly, or the civilians. There's most of them are civilians. Many of them have double nationalities or foreign nationals. Whatever Israel does, there will be some kind of ground assault or a joint attack from the sea on one side and the ground on the other. It's going to be messy. Israel should not rush into anything. It is the larger power. It needs to be careful, it needs to be calculated, and it needs to make sure that it's acting with as much precision and with as much intelligence and with as much air support as possible, not to get sucked into Hamas's traps. Of course, as every bit of time goes by.
Okay, let me ask this question. What would Hamas expect Israelis to do right now? What will be their, if you would have been there in the active service right now, what would you have expected from them in context of trapping the Israelis?
They're going to be preparing a lot of booby traps, snipers, get the Israelis sucked into street-to-street urban warfare, which, as you can see from just that picture, it's very dense there. Try to get them into the tunnels and try to create a very messy urban combat situation in which as many Israeli soldiers as possible are killed, using human shields as much as possible with the Gazan civilians, and creating an international catastrophe and a domestic pressure in Israel. The more the body count, unfortunately, will build up, there'll be Israeli domestic pressure to get out. And that's what they're banking on. And so Israel has to have very clear goals of what it wants to achieve. I think the more the regional moderate powers led by the Saudis and the Egyptians are involved in one way or another, the more the international community is involved, I think it will be to Israel's benefit here.
I think that's the most important point of the entire discussion, Dan. The Israeli state needs to have a clear, definitive strategic and political goal in a time frame as to what they want to do, where they want to do, how they want to do, because they are the bigger power, and Hamas would definitely like them to bring the entire army down, Aditya, to a very bloody, untidy, urban warfare. I think that's the biggest challenge of the Hamas 2.0 when we talk about Gaza. And I think the biggest challenge for the Israeli army would be to overcome those challenges which we have been discussing, which is about a messy urban warfare, which is street to street, hand to hand, and that can result in high casualties, which were witnessed in Iraq and those were witnessed in Syria. I think that is what Israel would definitely like to avoid when it takes over Gaza city.
يلا امشي امشي